Oh, shalom, my friends. Shalom, my enemies. Welcome, welcome. This is your old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I am a theater lover and a lover of comedy. And boy, oh boy, when you put those two things together, what do you get but the person who is in this beautiful room before us right now? Is this, first thing I have to ask, KEN LUDWIG, is that your home? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ludwig. Unmute yourself, please. Hit the mute button because we cannot hear you. Hold it. Ken, wait, I can't. You have to unmute. Hit the mute thing there.
Aha.
Shalom. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, thank God. So tell me, is that your lovely home, or are you in a library or something, or what?
This is my home. This is where I work every day. This is my study.
Good God. So was that a statue from like Lend Me a Tenor, or is that a real statue, or what?
That is a statue. The white one behind me comes from an English country house, sort of like Downton Abbey era, and I found it and I bought it and I crated it up by an antique dealer and brought it with me.
I gotta say that if I were a writer, I am a writer, but this is where I would love to write like this. What is your routine? Do you start in the morning? Do you go from like a certain hour to a certain hour every day, or do you need to be inspired or on deadline? How do you write what you do?
Well, I write on a very much a routine. I mean, I think inspired, you've got to put in the hard work and you get inspired. I don't think there's such a thing as waiting around. Being a writer it's not a hobby, it's a profession. And it's a profession that I take seriously the way I would take any other profession seriously. So I get up very early in the morning, I take my shower, and I come down here in my study and I lock all the doors and I get down to work for the next 6-8 hours.
Oh my God! Now, do you work on one project for that time, or do you work on one play for 3 hours and then a musical for an hour, and then you have a new idea and you start doing outline, or one project you're monomaniacal?
One project, monomaniacal. I write in longhand. Often the days are longer than that. They're often 8 or 10 hours. And I look on it as my job. My dad was a doctor, as you know, probably from that play we're talking about, Dear Jack, Dear Louise. When he put in a day's work, he went to the office, he came back late in the day, he did charts for his patients. I take that seriously. When I wanted to be in the theater as a kid, my parents said, "Oh, you got to go to graduate school." I said, "Well, I don't want to. I want to go in the theater." They said, "You got to go to graduate school." So I applied. I got into Harvard Law School. I went to Harvard Law School. I came out. I started, because I had no money, I started practicing law with a big law firm in DC. And sure enough, same thing. Get up in the morning, you got to go to the work and you got to put in the hours because that's your profession. And when I changed my profession to become a writer, I don't take it any less seriously and I write if I haven't spent a day writing, I say, well, what's the matter? What, did I take a day off? It's not a hobby.
I say 9 to 3 or 4, 5 days a week, or 7.
7, and it's not 9. It's about 6 in the
I'm
morning.
sorry, you're right. You go till probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
I
How
go
much of your work day though then has to be spent with non-creative aspects of being a business writing, and it is your career of dealing with your agent, of submission stuff, of writing, well, this is what I've done before, and here, please give me this grant, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question. And most people don't ask that question. Very smart. And it really is, because in a way I've got two jobs and I have to juggle them. When I was just a writer and I was just getting established, it was the writing. And then I'd get things done in church basements. When it became my shows started being done in commercial venues, it became a job. So right now I have an assistant, I have a manager, I have the executive director of my company, I have a publicist, and I have an agent. And so my business of having my plays available, advertised out there, that I do Zoom calls to people who are doing my shows, and lucky me, I'm lucky to have that because it's a way to get people to my shows. Traveling, I was in England last month because 2 shows are opening back to back heading for the West End. And so it is a business. So there are some days that I don't wake up and just write all day. If I'm in a plane to New York or to London, it's different. So there is the business aspect of it, and that takes up, I'd say, as much as a quarter of my working life.
When you're, are you invited, let's say, to rehearsals to be part of it, or do they just the director have you there for the first table read and then you go away until almost like dress rehearsal time, or how much once you give something over to a director, are you there or do you step back, or does it depend on the show?
Well, it depends on where we are in the show. When it's a world premiere, meaning it's either going to Broadway or the West End or a regional theater that I love. Many of my plays just go straight to regional theaters, and I've had some that I've had long-term relationships with, where I've had 3 or 4 at the same one. The McCarter Theater has done 2. Did 4 world premieres. Our Arena Stage has done 4. Alley Theater has done 4. Very involved with the Old Globe Theater in San Diego. So when it's be it Broadway or be it a regional theater, if it's the first production, meaning the first outing of this play, then I'm very, very involved, because I'm still involved in shaping the play. You know, you don't write a play. A play is a bit of a blueprint. You write the play, and then as it gets realized the first time, I have to nudge it and fix it and unch it and
Unch. I love that word, unch. Yes.
That line a little longer and this one shorter, and make it funnier and make it less funny, and make sure the audience is interested. So what happens is, because when you write a play, you own the play. I am involved. I mean, you just do. It's under copyright law. You own the play. It is mine. So at that point, if a producer gets on board, the producer and I lock arms, and they'll get a percentage down the line. And then we hire a director. And then the 3 of us, the producer, the director, and I, make decisions of casting. Well, who will be the designer?
You're involved in that too, even the casting and the design.
It's my baby. It's my brainchild. I would not hand it off to somebody else and say, "Oh, you go figure that out. So surprise me on opening night." No, of course not. I'm tremendously involved. So choosing the designers, choosing the venue, choosing the actors, go to all the auditions, look at lists first to see who's coming to see us. If it's a Broadway show and it's not a matter of audition so much, it's a matter of choosing, looking at lists, talking to the casting director with my director and producer, and then we all make those choices. Then you finally get to you'll do a first reading. Well, of course I'm there with the drafts and my sleeves rolled up and a pencil, and saying, "Oh, that line isn't quite right," because you don't really know it till you hear it out of someone else's mouth, and then you really don't know it till it comes out of someone's mouth at a reading, and you have an audience. Because the audience tells you everything. So when I direct my first readings of my plays, I invite about 50 people who are friends of court, just friends who are there on folding chairs. We're in a rehearsal room. I say Arena Stage. I live in DC, so Molly Smith is always kind enough to give me some resources at her place, or Signature Theater has done that, or the Kennedy Center. So I go wherever it is, we put it on with an audience, and then I go, okay, now I'll fix the play, get it right. Now we'll go off to a regional theater or a commercial producer to do the first major production. And then I'm involved in every instant of that, every minute of that till opening night.
Wow.
Then when it's launched and it's on its way, I don't get involved in any other productions of it. It may have hundreds, usually do, thank goodness, hundreds and hundreds of productions all around the country and the world, but I don't get involved after that, because that's up to them. They just do it. It's a play and it's out there in the world.
Do you ever go? Do you get invited to, like, they're doing Moon Over Buffalo in Japan, and they want the playwright there? Do you show up, or oh, God bless you, it was great, but I'm working on something new?
I never go. I have this thing. I don't know. I've never seen any of my plays after they've opened in their big way, because it makes me feel like I'm living in the past. It's sort of an odd personal quirk. So I don't tend to do that. I do have in my mind's eye to go figure out where in Europe a lot of them are being done at the sort of the same time and go from city to city. A good friend of mine, Pete Gurney, A.R. Gurney Jr., did that with his wife, and they went and saw. So to go over to Europe and see maybe 10 different productions in 10 different languages, I have in my sights to do. I just haven't figured out when to do it.
Since you brought it up, I'm going to ask the late A.R. Gurney, do you have any cool memories, anecdotes, stories of him? I don't know the man personally, but you did, so, you know.
Well, I loved him. I have some great stories. I mean, when I had lunch with him once at the Lambs Club, I guess it was the Lambs Club, I said to him, Pete, this is early on in my career. I said, Pete, you're so prolific. How do you keep coming up with such good ideas? And he says, it's pretty easy. You find something you really like a good Henry James short story, and you steal it. You just steal the plot. You steal it, he said, and then you mask where it comes from, and you write it, and you make it your own. That's one of the tricks. And I thought that was a pretty good trick.
And have you used specifically stolen from public domain from 400 years ago in any particular play? Sure. As opposed to doing a direct, like a version of Cyrano where it's obvious, okay, this, but where you update it.
Well, once you're out of copyright, you can do what you want. So I've done adaptations of things like Baskerville's, an adaptation of The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's out of copyright. So once something's out of copyright, you can do what you want. And then usually you're actually you're doing an homage to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you're doing that. In terms of ideas I get from other plays that are now under copyright, well, we all do that all the time. Somebody famous, and it might have been Picasso. I think this is attributed to a lot of people, which is amateurs borrow, professionals steal. And you see, I read last night. I was reading some School for Scandal. I was reading
Sheridan
School for Scandal. It's such a great play. And I was thinking, there's certain aspects of that. I'll bet that's a good setup for a comic situation for Act 2. And it's not like you're stealing. You're standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before you, and you're using their techniques and their ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, have you ever, though, since you set yourself that work day, a 50-hour, 60-hour work week of what you do you ever suffer writer's block? Or is there always something you can either steal from, or some idea, or some movie you can watch that goes bing, or look at a painting and you're like, aha?
Well, there's moments that I will be working on an idea and I'll come to a halt on the idea and I go, I don't know where to go with this. It doesn't have any resonance right now for me. It's just not working for me. So I'll put it aside, but I have so many projects. I have about 10. I keep a little list next to me of things I want to write. I mean, some of them will stay on there for a while. I had always wanted to write Pride and Prejudice Part 2. And over the pandemic, I finished it, and it's now out with a producer. I always wanted to write, I had a new idea of a series about a woman detective called Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, wrote it over the pandemic. I've had ideas for some new comedies that are bright and big. And I've just been, right now I'm busy because I was just commissioned to write a comic opera for the Glimmerglass Festival up in Cooperstown, New York, using Rossini music. So it's kind of like Crazy for You in the sense that taking music and I'm making a whole new story, whole new lines, whole new characters, and I'm going to weave in all this Rossini music, and I'm an opera guy, and I'm working on that like crazy right now. So there's certainly no time to be bored at the moment.
Now here's a question for you. Like you mentioned Crazy for You, or Lend Me a Tenor, or Moon Over Buffalo, or even Tom Sawyer, or one of the other. And
Fox on the Fairway.
I'm sorry?
Fox on the Fairway.
Fox on the Fairway, this I do not know. But
okay.
But that's the thing. This I do not know, and a lot of the people from New York and the East Coast would not know, because all these things happen in regional theaters. So many of your pieces, and you're thrilled. I mean, they're world premiere. But is there a thing in you of like, well, these went to Broadway. How come this isn't playing either in a major New York off like Manhattan Theater Club, or isn't on Broadway? Does that rankle you, or do you understand why some plays get there and some don't? How's your feeling about that?
It's a great question. And there's a very honest answer. Look, Broadway, like the West End and all these places, go through shifts in taste and what they want at a certain time. There was a period of the heyday of, say, Neil Simon and Wendy Wasserstein, where boulevard comedies were what people wanted, which was light comedies that, touched you in some ways, really made you laugh. And there were hundreds of them, and they were great. Never Too Late with Paul Ford. I'm just coming up, Sabrina Fair, The Pleasure of His Company. Before that, of course, it was, Man Who Came to Dinner, and the era before. That was a period where that kind of play was done regularly on Broadway, and it then went on and typically was made into a movie. Always happened. I hit the tail end of that with some of my plays, Lend Me a Tenor, Moon Over Buffalo. I'm trying to think of the ones that have been on Broadway, the real comedies. Or Fox in the Fairway set in a golf setting. It's been really successful. And then a play called Baskerville, as I say, about based on the How the Baskervilles, which is I think my most produced play in the world right now. And as things happen, they all start to then, the new thing now is a lot of things start in the regionals and then they get to Broadway. So the play that we're talking about right now, Dear Jack, Dear Louise, or Why We're Here, right now has a Broadway producer, very serious. We have a Broadway star for the woman. We're looking for the guy. And we plan to open next fall on Broadway. Now,
this is breaking news. I didn't know this was out there. Oh, we're breaking news with that. So can you say who the woman is yet? Or
I can't. She's happy to have it known, but it hasn't been announced by the producer, and it will be very soon. And it looks really good. You never know with Broadway. It's always 50-50. Will it happen? Won't it happen? When you only know when the curtain goes up. When the curtain goes up, you know that it happened. This looks good. And it's because somehow producers thought this was right for the times. There's been so much upheaval in our theater in the past few years that different plays seem to be what Broadway wants to do. And not only doesn't it bother me, I've always felt that when people ask me, what about is there a national theater in the United States? If you go to England, you go to the West Bank and there's the South Bank, and there's the National Theater, that big, large edifice of poured concrete that has the Olivier and the Littleton and all those wonderful theaters. If you go to other places in Germany and Eastern Europe, and there's a National Theatre of Scotland. The National Theater of the United States is this. It is that network of 400 or 500 regional theaters throughout the United States. There are that many. Every state. I work in them all the time. You go down to Florida. I just had a big show at the Oslo. You go to in Idaho. You go to Kansas City. There's the New Theater. You go to Princeton, New Jersey, and there's the
McCarter's in Princeton, right?
McCarter, and then there's the Old Globe out in the West, and there's La Jolla, and there's Center Theater Group, and on and on, and the Arkansas rep, Indiana rep, Seattle rep, Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Chicago Shakes, and they go on and on to the point of 400 or 500 theaters. That's to say nothing of all the amateur theaters around the country, community theaters.
Right.
In the United States, that's a very strong movement of tremendously capable and do fine productions with people who love the theater. They don't have equity cards. It's why it's called, it's amateur in the sense they don't have equity cards. And then there's all the high schools, the thousands
and the colleges. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge thing. I mean, so that is national, as opposed to, I'm sure you remember Tony Randall trying to make a national actors theater that unfortunately did some fine work, but it just didn't happen.
One building, and he said, well, I'll call that the National. It was the Lyceum or something, I think.
Might have been, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, that was a noble, and he did some very good things there. But it seems to me what our national theater in the United States is that conglomeration of all these wonderful people and theaters and families who are working every day to put out great theater. And my plays are done in that national theater every day of the year. There isn't a day of the year that my plays aren't produced there.
Now,
Uh,
speaking of things getting produced and done, you've also worked in other media. So I'm going to ask a little bit about that. Did you actually do like the first draft of the Muppet movie?
I did. I did. I did that for Disney. I did it with Frank Oz. This was the redo. This was after, they'd had that whole, and then like a 20-year hiatus or 10 or 20, whatever it was. And they decided they wanted to put the Muppets back on the map. And that was by the time Disney had acquired them. And so Frank, an old friend, called me and said, let's do the new Muppet movie together. And we did. And of course, it was put on the shelf to start with. Every movie I've done for Hollywood first gets put on the shelf because that's what they do. They commission thousands of movies every year. That's where
And they make 20, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you saw the Muppet movie, when it came out, how much could you recognize and go, I wrote that and that part, I didn't write. And could you watch it objectively as a film? Or did you feel like, my script was better. They should have left it the way it was?
Oh, you always feel that. I also did Roger Rabbit, I might add. I did a sequel to Roger Rabbit Roger Rabbit for Kathleen Marshall and Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy. And for the original director. And again, they didn't really want to make, I think, a second one. The first was so brilliant, but they kept trying to make a second one. And the second one I wrote was great. And it's sitting in my study somewhere, and it's also sitting in some drawer in Hollywood. But
let me ask you, is there going to be a point when you will publish and make available? Because I always wonder about playwrights. Always they get compendiums, their works last, but so many playwrights make their money, big money in Hollywood, and they got screenplays sitting in drawers. Nobody ever sees them. Would you publish everything at one point, or give it to a library and say, hey, you want to read the screenplay I wrote for Roger Rabbit? It's real good,
Well, I've been approached by a very fine library to acquire my archive. And in putting that archive together, they will create a room, I guess, for my work. And hopefully part of the deal will be that they'll publish these works or make them available to the public. So yes, absolutely.
Because, you spend hours and hours writing these things that don't even get done, but you put the work in, and some of that may be your best work. And it's just like, nobody, never gets made. I find that just like, just on a personal level.
Absolutely.
Speaking of things that didn't get kind of made, although I guess a pilot was done, did you also do a pilot TV series or start one with Carol Channing? Please tell me some stories about that. Now, tell me, because she's been on this show before she died. So tell me a Carol Channing story.
Oh, Carol Channing and I were so close. I love Carol, and we were great friends. And Carol, it all started when Carol wanted me. She got a hold of Lend Me a Tenor early on, and she wanted me to make it about her. She wanted it to be, she'd be the star of Lend Me a Tenor, and it would be a soprano coming, and she'd be Aida or Carmen or something. And so she wanted me to change that. I didn't think it would be as good that way, so we ultimately didn't do that. It was, I think that's when I really got to know her and we became friends. And she was always touring, and she always lived in hotels. The remarkable thing about Carol was I'd tease her because she'd come and she'd stay at the Watergate. I live in DC. She'd stay at the Watergate, and I'd say, and if I wanted to come have lunch with her, I'd go to her suite, and she always had her own special food, little silver canisters, because she felt she was she had to be immune. She thought she had get the possibility of getting hives or this or that or the other thing. She was allergic, she thought, to this, that, and the other. So anyway, so she'd have her own food. We'd go there. So we became very, very close. She came over to our house one time when my daughter was little. My daughter was about 4 years old, and my daughter proceeded to crawl up behind her to be funny and pulled her wig off. Uh, we didn't know how Carol would take that, but in fact, Carol being Carol, she took it in great humor and laughed and put her wig back on, and we were a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. I knew her husband very well, and so they commissioned me to, every time I had a show that was a hit on Broadway, somebody commissioned me to do something in Hollywood. So they commissioned me to do a pilot TV series starring Carol. And I wrote it. And of course, like all these things, one of a million pilots, it gets put in a drawer and doesn't get done. And you go out there knowing that. That's why I don't write very much for Hollywood. They pay you a lot of money. And you do say to yourself, well, you got to pay the bills. And if they're going to pay you so much money, and even if you know it's going to go in a drawer, it's something to keep the wolf from the door.
Yeah, I mean, and you're the one with a work ethic of like, it's a job, 9 to 5 or 6 to 9, and might as well. So if it goes in a drawer, somebody's paying me to sit there at a computer. All right.
I feel like what I do, I feel responsible, having come from a family. If you see Dear Jack, Dear Louise, and you meet my father there, is that he took being a dermatologist very seriously. It was a profession. So it's more that I have a profession and I work at my profession. I wouldn't do a pilot or a movie if I thought it had no possibilities. I wouldn't write something that I knew was going to go in a drawer. But when you're in Hollywood, it's likely that it's not going to be done. So I wrote a pilot for Carol, and she was the sheriff of a town in modern day, but it was set in the Midwest, where she could really call the shots about what went on in the town. I wrote the first episode. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in this house. It's very funny.
Did they make the pilot episode, or the script just didn't even? Oh man. No. Now let me also ask you, and before first let me ask you to make sure, because we keep mentioning Dear Jack, Dear Louise, but I haven't. Shame on me, I haven't told people that you can go see this play at the George Street Playhouse. Is playing now through November 21st. There's the program for it. It's in Livingston, New Jersey. So go. It's easy to get to. Go see it. The audience is masked. Do you have to wear it? And what's the protocols over there?
I'm going up to see it later in the run. I assume they are masked. I know David Saint, who is the artistic director and is the director of this show. He's terrific, and he would be on top of every protocol. Aside from being a real genius as an artist, he's very responsible, and he runs the theater extremely well. So I'm sure it's safe. I have no doubt whatsoever. I've been to a lot of theater since we reopened up. I had to go to England because I have these shows happening there, and I went to a lot of theater, and it really felt like the world is opening up again that way. So I felt very safe.
Halavai. But let me also, we haven't really, you keep mentioning that, the show's about your dad. The show's about, tell us, what is Dear Jack, Dear Louise about? The elevator pitch. Let's hear it.
Elevator pitch is easy. My mother was a woman who, during World War II, was a youngster, and she was 21 years old, and she grew up in Brooklyn, and she came from a Jewish family that her dad was a tailor, and they lived close enough to New York that she was exposed to Broadway, and she decided at the age of 21 she wanted to be a Broadway showgirl. So she leaves school, she starts taking tap dancing lessons, singing lessons, starts auditioning, and lives at one of those stage door canteen type places with what are later become very famous people. But they were all the kids trying to make it at Broadway, on Broadway. Meanwhile, at the same time, there's this fella who lives in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, named Jack Ludwig. And Jack Ludwig came also through Ellis Island, also from the Eastern European world, fleeing the pogroms, also comes to the East Coast of America and comes through Ellis Island, but his group of family goes to the Philadelphia area, and he ends up in little Coatesville, Pennsylvania. His father does, and his father is also a tailor. So these two tailors somehow must have known each other. The Rabiners and the Ludwigs. So the Rabbiners and the Ludwigs, somewhere along the line, those two grandpas say, you know what? Those are my grandfathers. They say, you know, your son ought to meet my daughter. Your daughter ought to meet my son. She's a good-looking girl. The trouble was, at that point, my father had just finished medical school. He put himself through medical school by working in the steel mills they were called, what were they called? Coatesville, the Lucan Steel Mill. Lucan Steel had a big plant in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Put himself through college and through medical school. He gets out of medical school, he gets drafted, and he's sent all the way out to Medford, Oregon, 3,000 miles away, to take care of the wounded coming in from the Pacific Theater. So he's out there in Medford, Oregon. She's in Brooklyn. They're 3,000 miles away. Their parents say, you two should know each other. So they start writing letters to each other. And the story of the play is entirely told in their letters, because for years they wrote letters to each other all throughout the war.
So, and speaking of stealing, again, Pete Gurney did a very famous play that was epistolary in nature.
Absolutely.
You adapted into the story of your own background, of your own family.
Love Letters, a wonderful play. And actually, it was Pete's play that I first was going to think of doing this differently. Maybe my mom would get married and go out to the West Coast and be, you know, sort of like I Love Lucy, causing havoc in the barracks. And then I thought, well, no, that would take 10 actors and this and that and the other. What about an epistolary play? What about 2 characters? And then I thought of Pete's play. I reread Pete's play. It's a wonderful play. And so I thought, oh, that's a good idea. There aren't too many plays based on letters in our canon. There's another one, Dear Liar, which are the letters of George Bernard Shaw and Mrs. Patrick Campbell.
And Les Liaisons Dangereuses, is that a letter, or is just a letter novel that they adapted into a play? I'm not sure.
A novel that was epistolary, and they made it into a regular play.
Okay. I'm just showing off that I know some of these things. That's all. I'm just boasting. But by the way, we're talking with KEN Ludwig. If you have a couple more minutes, I would love to ask you a couple more questions. Because
I have two, because I have a meeting in 15 minutes.
Okay, but since you mentioned the Jewishness of your family, first of all, does Jewishness play, because you don't write Neil Simon-y, ethnic-y kind of Jewish people generally. But does Judaism in any way, or cultural Judaism, factor into the way you write, the jokes you make, the humor, or the life of your characters?
I think it does, and I think it does in a very real way. But I think it's more sub rosa. I think it's in terms of the rhythms I write in. I'm used to hearing them. I grew up in the same world that Neil Simon grew up in, and people who wrote in that style. But I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, not in New York or LA. So I was not exposed to the relentlessness of being in a Jewish community. So I didn't just write out of, our local deli was filled with all those great accents and those great rhythms. But I found that I wanted to write about the small communities that I lived in. So as growing up, so my first big commercial success, Lend Me a Tenor, is set in Cleveland, Ohio, where there's an opera company. I was always an intellectual kind of a guy. I loved opera. I still do. I'm writing an opera for Glimmerglass, and I like the idea of, and the plays that I admired over the years growing up were an intellectual group of plays. I'm a big Shakespeare guy. I've written. I wish I had a copy close by.
You wrote a book on how to teach Shakespeare, didn't you?
I wrote a book called How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, which was named the best Shakespeare book of the year. And it's a really good book. Its real title is How to Teach Yourself Shakespeare, because everybody's afraid of Shakespeare. So it's how to teach yourself Shakespeare.
Speaking, all right, elevator pitch again. What is like one great tip that you would tell people if they have to tackle Shakespeare? They want to tell the kid or a school teacher in 5th grade wants to do a little Shakespeare in the classroom. What is your advice?
Take a small passage of 4 to 6 lines, that's all, and memorize them. To memorize them, you need to know every single word in that passage. You have to understand what the passage means, who's talking, so you really understand it. And then memorize it cold, cold when Viola, the heroine of Twelfth Night, goes to woo Olivia, the most beautiful countess that ever lived. The countess says, well, why should I listen? What if you loved me? She says she's coming there to woo Olivia for her boss. She says, well, if you loved me, what would you do? And Viola answers, make me a willow cabin at your gate and call upon my soul within the house. Write loyal cantons of contemned love and sing them loud even to the very night. Halloo your name to the reverberate hills and make the babbling gossip of the air cry out, oh, Olivia! Oh, you would not rest between the elements of air and earth, but you would pity me.
Yeah.
Now, when she says that to Olivia, what happens? Olivia falls in love with her.
Understandable. My God, I fell in love with you a little bit there, and I'm a straight person, but oh my God, yes.
So you want to learn some Shakespeare, and this is what this book does. It takes you through short passage, and they get a little longer and tells you which, and learn what they mean and what their context is, who's saying what, and memorize that passage. And I did that with my kids. That's how I developed this whole thing when they were youngsters. And by the time my daughter went to college, she knew 1,000 lines of Shakespeare. She could just rattle them off because they become second nature. And so they become part of who you are as a writer and as a reader and as a scholar and as an interesting person. Yeah.
And by the way, this interesting person that alas we have to let go in a minute or two, but first of all, this interesting person that we've been talking to is KEN LUDWIG. First of all, go see Dear Jack, Dear Louise. It's playing at the George Street Playhouse in Livingston, New Jersey from now through November 21st. Go see. It's all about his dad and his mom and how they incongruously met, although you do spin a yarn there. Yeah, because they're both Taylor. Anywho, so yes. But last question and by the way, KenLudwig.com. KenLudwig.com is the place to please, yes.
www.kenludwig.com. Ludwig, I pronounce it Ludwig for what it's worth.
Training your daughter in Shakespeare and getting her ready for life in that way. We can tell that you went to Harvard. Tell us a Harvard story. And also, one of your teachers was Leonard Bernstein.
One of my teachers was Leonard Bernstein. He was there preparing the Norton lectures, and he put up a sign and he said, any student who wants to come in and show me their compositions, I'll take a look. And I had been an undergraduate, I had been a music theory and composition major, and I had written a song cycle of Shakespeare songs. So I took them in to see. So I went in with all the chutzpah, you're young, you don't know, you're such a schmuck when you're young. I'd be scared now, but there he is. I knocked on his door. I said, Mr. Bernstein, you said we could come in. So he sat there. He spent 2 hours with me. He then said, hey, I'm going out to dinner with a bunch of the kids who invited me. You want to join us? I joined him. I became his acolyte. I worked with him. I worked for him. He invited me to be his secretary, but I didn't do that stupidly. But what I did was, he then said, you're in law school. He said, you don't want to be a lawyer. You want to be in the theater. He says, so drop what you're doing and join my graduate level classes in music. I'm doing one on musical theater. And I did.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked that question. And you have never looked back, even though mostly you've been in, or you've written musicals to other people's music and stuff. You're not really known as a songwriter.
I didn't compose very well. I wasn't a very good music writer. Yeah.
But you are a very good playwright, and people can see for themselves when they go see Dear Jack, Dear Louise at the George Street Playhouse, and when they go to see the opera that you're working on, the Glimmerglass. Wait, no.
Called Tenor Overboard.
Tenor Overboard, coming to Glimmerglass, what, next year?
Next summer, this coming summer.
Alibi. KEN LUDWIG, it has been a delight. It's been a joy talking to you. I thank you so much for being with us in the Dayberg. I know you have another interview, so sadly we let you go, but we wish you many broken legs more and much more great writing to come.
Thank you. You're a delight. Thank you so much. I love being here.
Shalom.
Thanks.
Shalom to you.
Shalom. Shalom. Bye-bye.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, what a delight! What a
I
Lud.
put the tickets for the George Street Playhouse in the link.
As in the if you look on the Facebook link,
October
the
to November.
November 21st, it's playing through.
It's through October 26th through November 21st at the Arthur Lawrence Theater.
Oh, well, Arthur Lawrence, the guy who co-wrote Gypsy and West Side Story. My gosh! So
tickets now.
that's a pretty good thing. So Ken, look, you know, as great as Ludwig van Beethoven was, we like Ken Ludwig even more. Yes, we do.
It's sold out on the 3rd of November. Sold out. So summer sold out. Yeah.
Get your tickets now. You know what? No, go back in time. Get your tickets a week ago so you have more options of places to sit.